The structure that we see for NORAD would have to be altered. We'd probably have to get more F-35s.
The United States would.
The United States would.
In order to
fully protect the continent.
If Canada did not have the F-35, do you think that American planes would more often be in Canada?
That changes our, defense capability, and as such, we have to figure out how we're going to replace that.
U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra issued a stark warning this week that the North American Aerospace Defense Command Agreement would have to be altered if Canada does not move forward with the purchase of 88 F-35 fighter jets. The ambassador stated that if Canada pulls back from the order, the United States would likely need to purchase more of the advanced fighter aircraft for its own air force and fly them more often into Canadian airspace to address threats. Approaching the U.S., NORAD would have to be altered, Hoekstra told CBC News in an exclusive interview at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. He said if Canada is no longer going to provide that capability, then the United States has to fill those gaps. The North American Air Defense Command is a decades-old partnership between Canada and the United States, which tracks inbound threats and scrambles armed jets to intercept where appropriate. It allows the closest aircraft to respond. Canada, in 2023, finalized a deal to purchase 88 Lockheed Martin F-35s with the company and the U.S. government. The original commitment was valued at approximately $19 billion. However, in 2025, Ottawa said it was reconsidering the deal. Escalating costs, now estimated at $27.7 billion, following a 2025 audit up significantly from the original projection, have prompted the review. Last March, in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threats, Canada announced it was reviewing its order for 88 F-35 stealth fighter jets. Canada signed the deal with U.S. defense giant Lockheed Martin in 2023 after years of delay and put down money for the first 16 jets due to be delivered starting this year. While Canada would take the 16 jets, the military would look at alternatives elsewhere for fighter jets. Hoekstra warned that if Canada decides to go with what he called an inferior product that is not as interchangeable or interoperable as what the F-35 is, that changes U.S. defense capability. And as such, the United States has to figure out how to replace that. If the Carney government were to order the Swedish-built Gripen fighter jet, as it is, considering the ambassador says the arrangement with NORAD would still have to be rethought. Delays in production and concerns over affordability have fueled debates about alternatives, including the Swedish Saab Gripen E, which some argue offers better value and Arctic performance without the same level of dependency on U.S. supply. Chains. The F-35 deal was selected partly for its advanced stealth capabilities and sensor fusion and interoperability with NATO and NORAD partners, qualities deemed essential for modern aerial defense. Hoekstra's comments come at a time of increasing strain between the United States and Canada, with Washington particularly concerned about Ottawa's warming relationship with Beijing. The controversy stems from Canada's 2022 agreement to acquire 88 F-35A stealth fighters from Lockheed Martin to replace its aging CF-18 fleet with an initial commitment to fund the first 16. Aircraft. Andrea Charon, director of the Centre for Defence and Security Studies at the University of Manitoba and one of Canada's top analytical voices on NORAD, stated that public sniping only benefits adversaries and risks undermining the credibility. Shared deterrence. Political disputes come and go, she said. NORAD's mission does not.
That Canadians and Americans have to invest and understand the importance of NORAD, because if they don't, it can simply be marginalized or disappeared.
CBC News asked the U.S. ambassador whether he recognized the political implications of the Canadian government choosing the F-35 when many Canadians see the United States itself as a threat amid Trump's recent and repeated talk of the 51st state and annexing Greenland.
Should be the 51st state, really. It would make a great state. And
that's crazy. We're not a threat, Hoekstra responded. In an interview last month with National Post, Hoekstra seemed much more casual about the F-35 deal. With Sweden courting the Carney government to consider instead purchasing its Gripen fighter aircraft made by Swedish company Saab, the U.S. ambassador was asked in a December 8, 2025 interview whether the U.S. regards Canada's review of the F-35 purchase as a trade irritant. Canada can do what it wants on the F-35, Hoekstra said at that time. The shift in tone from December to January reflects growing concern in Washington about Canada's procurement decisions. U.S. officials argue that interoperability is a central reason for Canada's selection of the F-35, which is already operated by the U.S. Air Force and several NATO allies. Hoekstra suggested that if Canada does not field a fleet compatible with US systems, American forces would need to assume a greater share of air policing missions over Canadian territory. Under the current terms of NORAD, the US and Canada can operate in one another's airspace to track or intercept threats. However, Hoekstra indicated US intervention would go even further should the fighter jet deal change, thus requiring new terms to the Cold War era agreement. That could mean the US would need to purchase more F-35 fighter jets for its own use and use them to intervene in Canadian airspace more frequently. NORAD relies on closely integrated fighter fleets and sensors and command systems to ensure that the nearest available aircraft, whether Canadian or American, can respond quickly to airspace incursions. The review has drawn a sharp response from Washington. Ambassador Hoekstra said publicly that failing to complete the F-35 purchase would have significant consequences for NORAD, the binational command responsible for the aerospace defense of North America. Canada has already invested billions of dollars into the early stages of the F-35 program, including participation in initial production and supply chain commitments and major infrastructure upgrades at key Royal Canadian Air. Force bases to support the aircraft's unique maintenance and stealth and data requirements. These sunk costs have strengthened arguments from proponents who say backing away now would waste prior investments and weaken interoperability with US forces. At the same time, the full 88 jet commitment remains under intense political and public scrutiny, as decision makers weigh Canada's actual operational needs against ballooning long-term costs and life cycle, maintenance expenses, and concerns over strategic autonomy. Critics argue that the aircraft's dependence on US-controlled software and upgrades and sustainment creates vulnerabilities that could limit Canada's independent decision-making in future conflicts. The stakes extend far beyond procurement. The outcome of this review is expected to shape not only Canada's Air Force modernization for decades, but also the future dynamics of continental defense under NORAD. As airspace becomes increasingly contested by hypersonic weapons and long-range bombers and unmanned systems, Canada's role in North American defense is under renewed scrutiny. US officials argue that seamless integration, best achieved through the F-35, is essential to maintaining credible deterrence. Canadian critics counter that integration should not come at the cost of sovereignty or turn alliance cooperation into an instrument of pressure. This dispute is unfolding amid broader strains in bilateral relations, including trade conflicts and industrial policy disagreements and diverging approaches to global security priorities. The ambassador's warning is widely seen as part of a broader pattern in which the administration of Donald Trump has openly used economic and security leverage to influence allied decision-making. It follows Trump's recent threats to impose tariffs on European allies over unrelated geopolitical disputes, including pressure campaigns tied to US ambitions regarding Greenland. For many observers, the F-35 warning fits squarely into this coercive diplomatic style. Public reaction in Canada has been sharp. Many Canadians interpret the message as pressure bordering on coercion, particularly suggestions that the United States could increase its own fighter presence over Canadian airspace if Ottawa alters its plans. Even when framed as protecting the continent, the idea of expanded US military flights has alarmed sovereignty advocates who argue that defense cooperation should not be used to dictate procurement choices. As Ottawa weighs whether to proceed with the full F-35 purchase or adopt a mixed fleet or pursue alternatives such as Sweden's Saab Gripen, the decision now carries consequences far beyond aircraft selection. It may redefine the balance between alliance dependence and national autonomy in Canada-US defense relations for years to come.